Something on that order. Today, I'm very happy to have back with us, Shawn Steele is back today. Right here. Wow. A little over there, spreading. Shawn was the chairman of the California Republican Party and was recently elected to the Republican National Committee. And was Nader's second choice for vice president, but he ended up with Matt Gonzalez. So speaking on behalf of the Ralph Nader presidency, please welcome Shawn Steele.
One, two, one, two. It's really nice to be here. Having any Republican, anybody to the center-right coalition to be invited to Berkeley is a big deal. And you know, obviously, if you're not of the politically correct persuasion, you get a little bit nervous about the kind of reception you're going to get. I did get some great pictures of the demonstration in front of the Marine recruiting station, and it's just so classic. I mean, that's the Berkeley that I remember. You know, the folks on the other side, they're a lot older than they used to be, and you know, with their anti-Marine approach, and then a bunch of people that are actually half as old as the protesters with the American flags, and I think that's a good sign. I got elected a couple of months ago to the Republican National Committee. I'm probably the 15th committee man for the California Republican Party to the National Committee. There's 150 members, 3 from each state, chairman, a committee woman, a committee man. We adopted the committee woman concept sometime in the progressive era, and so that's why we have 150 members. That body runs the National Republican Party. It's a $300 million corporation. And it's really been in existence since 1856. And I think that's kind of neat. That's around the time that Cal was formed. And I did a little digging. And Cornelius Cole, of course, and this will be on the final exam, C-O-L-E, was a founding chairman of the California Republican Party and our first committee man. So it's kind of a nice lineage to understand. But he formed it in Sacramento, California, with 4 dry good merchants, because in 1856, America was more divided than at any time in its entire history, including today. There was a movement by the pro-slavery faction to extend slavery in the West. The battles in Kansas and Nebraska were going on. John Brown is out there. It was hellacious. The country was bitterly divided, and at that point, it looked like that California would become a slave state. There was efforts to try to get a railroad directly from Texas to California to accelerate, try to have California flip as a slave state. In fact, the 3 Democrat governors up until 1856 were not only Democrats, all 3 were pro-slavery Democrats, as opposed to northern Democrats. So the Republicans knew they had to do something. The Whig Party was dead. They created the Republican Party in 1856 and presented their candidates and went down the glorious defeat. But 4 years later, Cornelius Cole leading the party, California barely crept into the Republican camp by having a plurality vote for Abraham Lincoln. And that was pretty much the end of the pro-slavery Democrats in California, I would hope. Now, this political election of 2008 is absolutely the most fascinating puzzle, zoo, show, soap opera I've ever seen. And I think many of us will ever see in our entire lives. Everything that I had predicted, I've been wrong. I have been wrong about who was going to win what primary, what was going to go. Remember, the Republicans were going to have the messy primaries. They're going to be slaughtering each other. They're going to be fighting all the way until the convention in Minneapolis. And it was going to be ugly and brutal to the very end. And Republicans weren't going to have any effervescence at all. And the Democrats, it was clear. It was Hillary's convention. It was the first female. She was going to win everything. It was going to be basically a coronation for her. And it flipped completely the opposite way. John McCain, what a great story he has, if you like the politics. And McCain was, he was the heir apparent. He was the big guy. He was the one that was supposed to win this thing, a year before the primary season. And then in July, he just hit the bottom. I mean, his staff left him. His money dried up. He wasn't invited to anything. He was ridiculed. He was pretty much by himself. He had, in June and July, he had 5 staffers supporting him. And frankly, he was written off by all the smart guys. All the smart ones, all the pundits said, this guy's finished. We'll never see him again. And he kept showing up to these debates, and he kept showing up, and he kept presenting his case. And then, Rudy Giuliani, the interesting, flamboyant mayor of New York, spends $60 million, and he gets 1 delegate. And boy, that's not a good cost ratio for trying to get something done. On the other hand, McCain, limps into these primaries, and he gets stronger and stronger, and then finally by February it's over. Boom. He's a presumed nominee. All the Republicans endorse him, and they're happy. And then the thing that none of us expected, that the nice Democrat primary season has become a wonderful, fantastic uncivil war. And to the extent, from my point of view, I'm just a guy. Today's New York Times lead editorial, they call it Guns and Bitter, and it's talking about how low level both Hillary and Obama have gotten in attacking and insulting each other. It gets really good. Things are bad in the Democrats when Obama is saying "shame on you, Hillary." I mean, that's always a bad sign. When they start using the word "shame," that's a telltale sign. The fact that Obama in the last 48 hours said that Hillary would say or do anything to get elected. We've been saying that for years. That she likes guns and she's an Annie Oakley. That she's packing a six pack. She's going to be. You're going to find her at duck blinds. The New York Times criticized Obama for hurling sexist jokes against her. Oh, well, you got to agree with that, right? And I certainly do, calling her a monster. But on the other hand, look what Hillary has said. Can't be trusted, 3 o'clock in the morning. One of my favorite stories is Obama's in Iowa, and he's talking about to farmers, in Iowa. That's what you have in Iowa. And he says, have you seen the cost of arugula in a Whole Food market recently? Well, there's a problem with that. Nobody knew what that was, and they don't have a Whole Food market anywhere in Iowa. Just a little bit of touch you'll find that in metropolitan Washington, maybe Chicago, but you won't find it in Iowa. And then, of course, clinging to religion statement. And, of course, isn't it great? We're here in Berkeley, and it just happened a few miles from here. It had to have happened in San Francisco. It just had to have. He kind of let down his guard, and he wasn't really reflective. It was kind of an unguarded moment. And he says, yeah, well, the problem in these small-town communities of Pennsylvania is that, they're bitter and they're angry, and, they cling to their religion, they cling to their guns, and they don't like foreigners. And, and then irony, and the irony is, do you know who leaked the story? It was a blogger from Arianna Huffington's blog, a far left-wing blog that actually likes Obama. But it was such a hot story, the blogger had to reveal it. And this particular blogger, I forget her name, she was blackballed. She was actually forbidden to go to any of Obama events because they didn't trust her, because she was considered kind of a loose cannon. Indeed, that was a good call. So they don't even trust their own, but she got in. She paid $1,000. She heard what Obama had to say, and she wrote it up, and he's been scrambling ever since. And the Washington Post called it, interestingly enough, it was crude academic Marxism. And that's the whole idea. Religion's the opiate of the people. They're clinging to their religion. And this in light of his experience with Reverend Wright. Having been in the church for 20 years, he never ever heard Reverend Wright say anything that was divisive or hostile or radical or inflammatory. And we now know that that's virtually impossible unless he really wasn't going to church all that time, or he was doing what a lot of us do all the time anyhow, looking at his BlackBerry while the lecture was going on. Well, he's got, I think Obama is the conventional wisdom that he's going to win the nomination, right? He's going to win it. Everybody says he's going to win it. Hillary's going to try to come back in Pennsylvania. She's going to try to come back in Indiana, maybe North Carolina. But the odds are against her, and it's looking like that they're just not going to get together pretty soon. Remember, in a couple of months ago, they were going to work together as a team, and they were going to go and have a, one was going to be president, and the other was going to be the vice presidential. But they couldn't sort that out. They hate each other. They've reached a point now that it's becoming, I think, unlikely that they would ever have anything to do with each other. We think that's, kind of exciting. As this goes on, I want to posit some revisionist history that might surprise you, and it's a thought. And if, I'm going to just try to go over this as quickly as I can, and then please talk to me afterwards if we don't get everything fully explained. Here are a couple of essential differences between the two parties. Between Obama, the presumed nominee, and McCain, in terms of the two great ideological divisions of the two major parties, there is a profound difference in the two parties. You will find people within the parties that kind of look like each other, but to the core, there are profound historical differences. First, I would say that the war against jihad and the Islamo-fascists is probably the most important issue in 2008. And it's a tremendous disconnect between the right-center coalition and the left-center coalition. It's a tremendous worldview difference. There was testimony in the Senate Homeland Security Committee where a scientist is postulating that within 20 years there will be a nuclear incident at a major American city. 20 years. He just thinks it's inevitable. There's been a lot of discussion about that. I just hope it's not Los Angeles. But sadly enough, it's something that we can't ignore. Bush has been extremely successful, right, not having any major incidents since 9/11. At the same time, by being successful, it's hurt him and his credibility because there's not a problem. Maybe there is no problem. Maybe 9/11 was just an incident, some obscure, strange, random problem that we'll never see again. Except the trouble is, all over the world, there's a tremendous fundamentalist revival among a small number of Islamists within the Muslim community that's quite dangerous. And, when we talk about a small number out of 1 billion people, 10% is 100 million. That is a large number of people to be unhappy. And we're not just seeing it in Afghanistan or Iraq, but we see it in Iran, which is a theocracy with soon to have nuclear capability, with a well-trained military and a mission. Thailand, the bloodshed is daily. We've seen the problems in Indonesia, North Africa, Europe, and India. So the bloodshed of the jihadists is in many parts of the world, and it's not getting better. Israel is about the only hope that we have a democracy and for Western civilization in the Middle East, and they're under constant bombardment. And it's something that I don't think the left understands, and I don't think they see it as a police action. They want to send out the FBI to round up these terrorists and, in a court of law and try to, either sue them or try to go through the Miranda rights. And yet we wouldn't do that with the Nazis. We wouldn't do that with the Japanese imperialists. It's a war. It's a real, live, but a different kind of war. And I think McCain understands that. And for both Democrat nominees to actually suggest seriously that the first thing, not the second, third, or 10th, the first thing they would do is withdraw troops. It's just, first of all, I don't believe them. I bet a lot of the Democrats actually don't believe that they'll do that because it's a preposterous notion. Would you just simply pull out the troops and say you're sorry, we overstayed our welcome? It'd be a political and a cultural disaster for not only the United States, but particularly for the people in Iraq. Then and a book that I would suggest, there's so much good stuff on this. Anything by Bernard Lewis, anything by Daniel Pipes, but my favorite is Infidel by Ayaan Hirsi Ali. She was raised a Muslim, devoted Muslim woman from Somalia. She was put into an arranged marriage. She escaped, went to the Netherlands, became a translator, then got elected in 2003, rather recent, to the Dutch Parliament. And then one of her best friends, not the grandnephew of Van Gogh, was murdered for a film that she and he put together, and now she lives in America basically as a political refugee with guards. But she has a fascinating book called Infidel that really describes from a woman's point of view what it's like living in a fundamentalist Muslim community and how antithetical to human rights it is. The other big area besides the war is the notion of individualism versus collectivism. This is really one of the great dividing points between our party and between the Democrats. And the conservatives are sort of the Mayab party, mind your own business, or leave us alone, or just, we don't want to be bothered with the government. It's mostly small shopkeepers, professionals, working folks that really value personal freedom and fear large government. They tend to be decentralist. They tend to be minimalist for government. They love free markets. They love exchange. They love freedom. But they're very suspicious of any government that just grows for the sake of growing, that promises to take care of them when they don't want to be taken care of. They just want to be able to live their own lives. A fundamental difference. But conservatives, by and large, believe the government's one and major and sole function is to protect the society. That is defense, and that is security. On the other hand, the progressive liberals, there's a fascinating new book, and it's really my favorite read in the last year, by Jonah Goldberg, called Liberal Fascism. This is a mind-boggling, paradigm-shifting analysis of the origins of progressives in America, and among the great three thinkers of the early 20th century, for the new state, the new government, and big government, was Woodrow Wilson, Bismarck of Germany, and a young socialist writer and agitator, Benito Mussolini. You have no idea how popular Mussolini was until Hitler came along. He was the talk of the town in London and New York. He got the trains to run on time. He got this anarchic state of Italy to work together, and things were coming to fruition because what they fused and what they came up with, and Woodrow Wilson wrote a book himself called The State, appropriately enough, that the state is a religion. You need a strong national leader, that the state is justified using force for the common good. The state's responsible for health and the well-being of the people. There needs to be a uniformity of thought. And finally, rivals are usually enemies of the state and need to be crushed. That also happens to be a great definition for fascism. So that's the point. He's arguing that there are elements, not entirely, not for every person, but there are elements in the early progressive movement that was born out of this international socialist movement, of which fascism was one of the origins from international socialism. And of course, World War I under Woodrow Wilson saw the greatest centralization of power in all of American history up to that time. He had 200,000 people through the Attorney General's office that were deputized to be looking for people that were saying bad things about entering World War I, because it was illegal. It was speech control and thought control on a level that we've never seen before or since. He imposed wage and price controls. He had national boards set up to control industries. He seized railroads. Wilson was a catastrophe for small government, and that's something that Republicans always groused against. You know, when Wilson's term of office was over in 1920, Republicans' position at the time was return to normalcy, meaning let's get out of this whirlwind of big government. Let's get back to our communities, back to our states. Let's not think that everything has to go through Washington. Well, another major area is what liberals like to do in the turn of the century, in the 10s and the 20s, is what we call the social question. And the social question, that what do you do with all these people that are not well educated, that just keep reproducing? In other words, basically they would say idiots were begetting idiots. And this was a big issue for Woodrow Wilson. He wrote about it extensively. Sidney Webb of the Fabian Society, George Bernard Shaw, H.G. Wells, John Maynard Keynes. And it was basically, the movement was called eugenics. And it was very popular, primarily in the United States, and in England. And then after that, the Germans were so amazed that these Americans are so far ahead of their time, controlling populations. That is, you got to make sure that you have racial health, is literally what it was called. For example, H.G. Wells wrote that the swarms of black and brown and dirty whites and yellow people would have to go. He wrote this in his book called The New Republic, called them parasitic classes. George Bernard Shaw, which you've all seen his plays, you've read his work, well, he also said the only fundamental socialism is the socialization of the selective breeding of man. That was the predominant view among progressives, and then in the 1930s they changed their term from progressives to liberal, and that's their history. They got to own it. Of course, today you're not going to find many pro-eugenics either on the right or on the left, but who was opposing the forced sterilization programs, the emerging abortion industry? Who was opposing that in the 20s and the 30s? It was the Catholic Church. They've always opposed it. It was conservatives that didn't like that kind of government control. Margaret Sanger is somebody you need to study. She's a huge icon within the progressive left community. She founded what's called nowadays Planned Parenthood, and in 1939 she was married to H.G. Wells, oddly enough, but for many years she was agitating for female rights and against population explosion. But she started what was called the infamous Negro Project in 1939, where, quote, the mass of Negroes still breed carelessly and disastrously producing the least intelligent and the least fit. Now, these are very strong words. And she is still revered. You go to any Planned Parenthood community office, you'll see pictures of her. She was seen as somebody way ahead of her time, and yet she was a pure racist in the sense of the word, and was quite striking about it. And she wanted to have a pure race with more intelligent people, happier children, not so many people that were of what she considered a lot less value. The final difference that I suggest between the two parties, there's so many to talk about, but I'd talk about it, in this case, is identity politics. In identity politics, how strange history is. Conservatives today, by and large, support, the way Lincoln did, a color-blind society. Society that's not based upon the person's origins or religion or ethnic background or color. And of course, it was the same principle enunciated by Martin Luther King in 1963. But since then, the Black Power movement came in, African centrist movement came in, and now today, what do we have as a fruit of this identity politics? What you have, of course, is you have blacks and Latinos fighting over political offices in Los Angeles. We're seeing that certain parts of Los Angeles are having larger and larger Hispanic populations moving in, and black office holders are losing their power base. And so it shouldn't matter what the race is, but for the leaders, so-called leaders in those two communities, it's a big issue. One of my favorite examples is what just happened in Texas. Anybody follow the Texas primary between Hillary Clinton and Obama? Well, there were street fights and struggles between Latino Democrat delegates and Obama black delegates, right in the precinct level. And this is the ultimate end of identity politics, when it's race overall, it's ethnic origin overall. What you think doesn't matter. It's who you appear to be. That seems to be the key word. And now we're seeing this emerging dichotomy, started off by Louis Farrakhan, and then there's a Reverend Eric Lee in Los Angeles just last week, an inflammatory anti-Semitic speech, and we're seeing more anti-Semitism emerging from certain Christian black ministers. That is just, it's mind-boggling how rife and how widespread it is. So again, suggestion, another Bay Area candidate favorite of mine is Shelby Steele at the Hoover Institute. And he has written a book, Content of Their Character. He's quite good in explaining this background. And finally, I'll close with this because I want to get into some questions. Goodness knows where we're going to go. I think the Republicans should really be getting their asses kicked. This is a lousy year. The economy doesn't look that great. Foreclosures. You know, the war's not popular. We like our wars about 4 years long. You know, you put any extra time on that, Americans get really bored, and they want to do something else. And yet, McCain's ahead or even in most polls across the country. And yet, Obama and Hillary keep gutting and hurting each other, that their negatives keep growing on a larger level, and I don't think it's over. So what a strange year. You know, the tin soldier, John McCain, walking down, you know, bombs to the left of him, missiles to the right of him. He just keeps walking through the minefield, and he's untouched. I think Americans are going to look at national security as a key issue, and I think if that's what the focus is, McCain's probably going to emerge as the winner. But also, I think conservatives conservatives are not wild about John McCain. That probably helps him in a way. Presumably, conservatives are going to vote for him, and that's what he wants. But his big draw is to appeal to the middle, appeal to the independents, showing that he's a maverick, and that actually might be the good way to go. So I'll close with this. I'm going to give you my cell number if you want to talk politics. That's what I do. I'm not paid. I'm a volunteer, always been a volunteer. I'm a lawyer in private practice. I represent doctors and alternative healthcare communities. My cell number is 310-629-4943. Talk politics. Hey, I heard you in Ross's class, and you know, I thought I heard you call me a fascist. And then I'll say, yeah, that's probably true. If you come from the progressive generation, you probably are a fascist. Let's talk about that. And then I have email. I prefer actually email, Shawn Steele at ShawnSteele.com. No E at the end, never an E at the end. So on that basis, let's open this up to some questions and see what we got here. Thanks very much for being so nice. I appreciate it.
Let's start all the way in the back. So the one behind you.
Oh, okay. Okay. Now, eugenics is out of fashion. Hitler completely destroyed the concept. You know, the Holocaust, that was a big downer. And yet even John Maynard Keynes, the economist, was still on he joined a eugenics board in England in 1945, so I guess he was a little behind the curve. But collectivism is basically a notion that the government knows more than you do, knows more about where you should be born, knows more about the kind of health care you need, I represent a lot of acupuncturists and chiropractors. Believe me, they're not included, and they're not happy. And that's just an example of, you know, the state knowing more than the individual. I don't buy that. I think individuals generally are a lot smarter than government bureaucrats. But yes, of course, the whole idea is that what Hillary and Obama are proselytizing is that the government knows more than you do. You're just, you know, some little rube in a small community. We know the best schools to go to. Look what they've done for education. Look what the liberal Democrats have done for inner city schools that they've completely dominated through the teachers' unions for the last 50 years. Have schools improved? Are kids graduating? Not even half the kids in LA County graduate from the LA City Unified School District. It's a disaster under the teachers' union and the Democrats. But the fact is they believe that the government can do more, and they believe that really, if you have any problems, home, marriage problems, bad teenage daughters that disrespect their parents. I'm not getting personal here. Not enough oil, gas in your car. You don't have good funeral plans. Government should take care of everything. That was Bismarck's point of view in the 1870s and the 1880s. That was Bismarck's way of getting ahead of the socialists, keeping his government in power by offering pensions, by offering security, by offering what's called cradle to grave care. And there's a lot of people that want everything for free. Are you kidding? Getting stuff for free is a natural human inclination. We want to get it all for free. I want all the yogurt for free. I don't want to have to pay for anything. I just want to sit around and have people serve me. And there's a lot of people that really fundamentally believe they have a right to welfare. They have a right to somebody working for them so they can get goodies for free. Well, that is certainly not the conservative point of view. Not very small. It's a great conundrum. And the question is, what's so small about the U.S. military defense system? And that's a huge, huge problem. And here's how I justify it. It's the military is, I think, it's no longer the largest point of our spending. Social welfare programs, we spend a lot more on that nowadays. You may not have known that. I think if you're ever, I'm very skeptical of any government. The school board, the official city council, county supervisors, I think they're all basically pack rats, liars, cheats, thieves, and frauds. And that's why I like term limits. I want them to, I want them to share power and get out as quickly, steal something, but get out as quickly as possible. Then you have a new idealist. So I'm very much of an advocate of term limits. But the U.S. military is huge, but there's nobody else right now that is our equivalent in the world. There is nobody that can stand up to Islamofascism and the growth of China in a very unstable world where half the world is not living in a democratic, free society, but are actually run by tyrants. Very bad people that would love to, love to oppress you and relegate you right away. So it's a big challenge. Do conservatives like to see government growing with the military? No, they don't. But if the government has justification for doing anything, it's to protect this country, and that means a pretty big defense budget. Yeah, that's it's a great question. Lincoln talked about, I guess, the integration of races as a bad idea. He said a lot of things that also contradicted that as well. There's a huge body of writing. There are more books published on Abraham Lincoln this year than there was last year. Every year there's more and more books published about Lincoln. It's growing geometrically. And I'd like to think that was not a prevailing view of his. But you could argue, well, those were the times, the white folks thought this, and that was. I think you have to be held accounted for that. And Dick Nixon's Southern strategy, I don't think that was explicitly racist. It was just a matter of understanding where you could get the votes on that. And Dick Nixon is not my idea of a moral person. So I'm not going to defend him at all. I think he was a terribly immoral person. But I think he was far more anti-Semitic than he was, anti-black. But so I'm not here to defend Dick Nixon. But when it comes to Abraham Lincoln, I want you folks to think about this for a minute. The abortion industry is a huge phenomenon that most hip, academically smart people think, well, it's a woman's right to choose and none of our business, and let's let that go. But what do you think the thinking is going to be? What's your name? Brett. Brett, what do you think your great-great-great-great-grandson 200 years from now is going to be saying in some auditorium like this? People actually thought it was okay to kill a human being with all the science and technology that we have now, and people actually at the time thought abortions were perfectly moral and justifiable, and it was good. And so you got to be careful. And the times that you live in, you might think that the popular mandate is the good moral social order, but a couple of hundred years from now, it may look like you were involved in a massive murderous campaign against human beings, that you were the most pagan, anti-civilized people in the history of the world. Who knows? So you want to check your bases once in a while. With abortion.
Yeah, how does that reconcile?
I think that works out pretty good. Minimalist government. Oh, I see. Because abortion's a private concern. Yeah. I wouldn't put anybody in jail for the act. I'm not interested in jailing people and hunting down doctors or women for doing that. I think it's more of a moral question that needs to be discussed, and so it works. It's minimalist government. I'm not one of those, and I think you'll probably find that most conservatives are not interested in draconian enforcement and bringing about abortion laws. That's what you're going to find. I think they find that there's tremendous moral problems with it, that the people that actually embrace and use and are part of the abortion industry are going to have to live with. but I don't think you're going to find an enforcement issue there. So fortunately, that follows your paradigm once again. Conservatives want minimalist government. They want minimalist intrusion. That's not on the agenda. That's a great question for a Catholic. And I mean that. You know, we had a state chairman before me, John McGraw, hardcore Catholic, and he was against capital punishment and abortion. I like capital punishment. I think it's very, very useful. It's really hard. It's really hard to put a bad guy to death. You know, it takes 20 years, costs a fortune. It's very inefficient right now, but I think capital punishment is a moral course of action. And because what you have here is that you have somebody that's been adjudicated, hopefully with overwhelming evidence showing that beyond a reasonable doubt, that person did something so heinous, so evil, he doesn't deserve to live. On the other hand, if you're looking at the moral considerations, you know, little fetuses, have not committed any outrageous act against another human being. So I think that's the basis that I would look at. The irony is that we got a whole lot of abortions. I saw a stat this morning I couldn't believe. 37% of abortions in the United States are committed by black females. But that's 12% of the population. Within the black community, out of 100 pregnant black women, over 51% have abortions. You talk about eradicating a large number of people in a short period of time. This is Margaret Sanger's Negro Project, and it's going very strong, stronger than ever. That's just demographic information. Yes. Yeah. That's a great one. Well, I'm one of those that believe that the United States, from a de Tocqueville's point of view, is probably the most important and the greatest champion of human liberty in the history of all civilization. Now, that's my base for it. I think I can prove it. In terms of the United States creating a jihadist fundamentalist sect that is anti-Western, anti-Christian, and anti-Semitic, I think you have to study a little more about Islam and what it was originally as a warrior class. It's always been a warrior conqueror class starting in 700 AD, wiped out the Christian communities in North Africa, wiped out most of the Christian communities in the Middle East, and then moved through Greece up to Spain and tried to conquer France. So it's always been a warlike, but it goes through stages. Sometimes there's a militant fundamentalist stage, then they calm down for 500 years, then they come roaring back and they expand all over again. Right now, there's been a 200-year fervent fundamentalist resurgence within the Islamic community that makes it very volatile. Look, 500 years ago, if a bunch of jihadists got organized and started taking over stuff, we wouldn't care in California. Because, you know, there wasn't any transportation, there wasn't any modern weapons, wasn't any telephone, wasn't any car bombs. It didn't matter, except for the people, you know, in Sudan that were in Ethiopia that were fighting for their lives 500 years ago. But now it's a problem because in a heartbeat, we could be in an airplane in another part of the world in just a few hours. We can use remote controls and blow up things. We can hack computers. We can download designs for nuclear technology off the internet. And so it's a much, objectively, 9/11, I think if that taught us anything, that those big oceans that George Washington talked about no longer protect us. Well, it's a much, much smaller world, and for that reason, it's a much more dangerous world. But I mean, that kind of a question, I think, betrays. I think it needs to really reflect and study what are the origins, what is a Muslim Brotherhood? What are the people behind it? What are sensibilities? And you know what I find astonishing, and I hope some of you find astonishing, I can't think of any greater anti-women's attitude than the fundamentalist jihadist. The destruction against women, the mutilation against women, the subjugation of women is so historically unending, and the evidence is so overwhelming, and yet I'm waiting for those feminists to stand up and say, yes, you're right, Shawn, it's terrible what's going on in that part of the world. We're with you. But no, ever since Bill Clinton, feminism has completely lost its credibility in them. Well, boy, you really want to know what I think? My kid goes to USC. I don't care. Okay, hold it. Okay, I don't want to start anything. Would you pull out my tie? All kidding aside, cutting 8 hours, you guys get a ton of money. You're so well taken care of. You've got so many good things going for you. I don't have a lot of sympathy. I mean, a lot of folks, you could work. There's a lot of things you could do, but I don't know if retired people are responsible for your education. I don't know if working people are responsible for your education. I think you need to own it up, and you might have to take some loans on it and support yourself. So I'm not a big fan of unending government largesse, and it is true, out of respect for this fine institution, I did take my tie off today, though, and hope you appreciate that. This is out of friendship.
Pandering to the crowd?
Yeah, I know. Okay. Okay. Your question is, I'm not being fair to the Muslim religion because they are very liberal when it comes to women's rights, traditionally. Let's make something clear. In Pakistan, right after the breakup and it was an independent country, one sect of Muslims went to the government and said, this sect of Muslims, they're crazy, they're not following Muhammad's rule at all, they need to be rubbed out. So the Pakistan government created a commission and said, okay, let's find out what's the correct analysis, what is a good Muslim, what's a bad Muslim. So they went to like 30 of the major religious figures, and they got 30 separate, complete, distinct answers. So I don't pretend to say that there is one unified theory in Muslim. It basically depends on the school, the time, the structure, but I think I've been fairly careful saying fundamentalist, jihadist, Islamists, which I will tell you is a minority, and I'm being very generous, I think, no more than 10%. Now, I'm giving you 90% are happy, well-adjusted, pro-Western, nice, democratically minded human beings. I think that's wrong, actually. I would like it to be 90%. I've been waiting for those moderate Muslims to show up any day to join us, to work against the tyrannical Arab regimes, to work against the anti-human rights agenda of the jihadists, to work against those that would subjugate women. I'm waiting for those moderates, and I'm sure they're going to get organized and they're going to show up one of these days. But it's been a long time now. But I'm telling you that is probably not the majority view. I'm certain that it isn't. And I'm sure there's some wonderful, good traditions, but they're very, very quiet. And I think most moderate Muslims are scared to death of the fundamentalists. I think there's tremendous fear of their lives. And we've seen a lot of moderate Muslims in Egypt and other parts of the world that have been slaughtered, that have been killed, merely because they don't share the fundamentalist agenda. I think that's a real problem. Okay. Should we fund education as a means of effectively fighting the Islamist agenda? And I think that's probably in certain departments that's good. Lawrence Livermore probably could use a few more dollars. I think that might make sense. Okay, well, we got some more than I would have guessed. But I'm telling you, I'm not against funding education. My God. Education, higher education, you guys get billions and billions and billions of dollars, and oh man, I'm not, you're not in the top 100. I'm sorry. I mean, you're doing really well. Let's not argue. We got some real problems, but higher education's good. I'm totally in favor of it, and that's why we like private schools as well. Are you talking about Wilson? Okay. I'm going to try to rephrase your question, see if I get it right. That America is really not the champion of freedom because this might be a multicultural question. Shawn, how dare you? These bourgeois Western values of democratic elections and majority rule, and you know what? They've been doing it in Somalia this way for a millennium. How dare you want to impose your idea of government and democracy and liberty and First Amendment freedoms on these very happy tribalistic communities in Yemen? And so, who says that American democracy is superior to tribal societies in other parts of the world? I do. I think it's vastly superior. A gay question and a drug question, and that's very efficient. A gay drug question. I'm from the libertarian side of the party, and I'm very much a live and let kind of guy. I go one step further. You want to marry a horse? None of my business. I'm not against. No, hold on. I'm not against polygamy. Maybe I should be against polygamy. Well, I think theoretically I'm not against polygamy. But I certainly wouldn't choose it for myself. Actually, I think that really oppresses women in a fantastic way. But, as a male, as a flawed male, I can certainly see the advantages of that. Same thing with the drug culture. I've seen drugs, certainly destroy a lot of people, but like alcohol, like tobacco, if you want to use a substance that may be injurious to yourself, it's none of my business. And I say power to those that want to intoxicate themselves. Yeah, they're leaving like flies. They're just falling.
Last question, go ahead.
Why have conservatives adopted Israel? Okay, great question, great one, Ann. As a Democrat, as a Jew, why does it appear that conservatives are supporting Israel more than anybody else? Is that fair? Yeah. There's been a tremendous shift. When Harry Truman recognized the state of Israel, 5 minutes after its announcement that it was a state, that was a bipartisan approach. The Democrats were pro-Israel, the Republicans pro-Israel, but since the 60s, there's been a growth of radicalism, international radicalism within the Democrat Party that has questioned the traditional alliance to Israel, that has looked at the Palestinian question, has created a moral equivalency between the Palestinians and the Israelis. And since there's been an in-migration of a larger and growing Muslim community in the United States that's had an impact on the Democrat Party. Some of Obama's closest friends are Palestinians in Chicago. You're going to be seeing a lot more of that information coming out. I mean, very close friends and highly influential members. of the Palestinian international community. And I think the huge problem with Palestine is the unbelievable corrupt regimes of Yasser Arafat, who's just soaked billions away from the cause for his own personal family. And what's worse than the corruption is on the Hamas side, which is jihadist and has brought about endless suffering for Palestinians. So they got corrupt, and they have tyrants at the same time, no way morally equivalent to Israel. The fact is, I think there's a moral clarity on the center-right coalition that understand and appreciate our friends in the world are not the Palestinians, are not the jihadists, are not Arab tyrants, but are Israel pro-democratic, pro-Western values. And I think what you're finding is a growing alienation. And I will tell you, this election season, there will be huge defections of Jews leaving the Democrat Party. I've been waiting for this to happen many election cycles, but it's really happening this time because it's clear and obvious that a majority of Democrats are hostile to Israel, and they've reached that critical point in the last couple of years. Thank you. Hey.